just give me your general reaction to, let's focus on the House races and the big turnout for Republicans.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that I think what you're seeing across the state is, historically there's a myth that big turnout's bad for Republicans. I don't think we saw that by any means last night. So we're going to end up at 59 seats. Feel very strong about that. It'll be the largest majority, the second largest majority that we've had in the last decade. We're going to have 14 new members, flipped 7 seats. So I feel really good about where we are coming out of the election. One really key thing I think that Republicans should be very proud of, and shows that we represent the entire state of Iowa. We represent 97. We have a representation in 97 of Iowa's 99 counties. The Democrats only have about a dozen. So I think that I can confidently say that we speak on behalf of Iowans, that Iowans all across the state are invested in what we're trying to do here and keeping the state moving forward. So after last night, I feel really good about the turnout, and obviously getting to know these new members that are going to be coming in that worked so hard to get elected, and so we'll have a really good caucus.
What do you attribute to those flipping seats?
I think the first thing that I would say is we recruited the right candidates. I was saying all summer, anyone that wanted to ask the question, I was very transparent that we recognized that we were going to have to play defense, but when you're in the majority, you always have to do that. But I was very clear for the last several months that we were going to play a lot of offense, something that we have had big enough majorities that we haven't had to do a lot of in the last several elections. And President Trump being on the ballot really brings some of those races in which we flipped onto the table. So we made it very clear early on, and it was no secret. We were playing offense in about a half dozen districts and obviously we did really well in those. And so attributing that to a good ground game as well. I think that is going to be the biggest thing. And, both parties kind of after the election look and see what things they should do better, do differently. I can tell you since June, House Republican candidates and incumbents have been out there door knocking and running what we would consider more of a traditional campaign, because I think Iowans expect to see especially their local elected official. If it's a congressional race, you may not expect to see them at your door. Probably not a Senate race, for sure not a presidential race. But for decades in Iowa, you expect to see your local legislator, regardless of party. And when you're only seeing that from only from the Republican, I think that gives you the opportunity to build some relationships. And so when those negative attacks start happening with all the out-of-state money that poured in here, I think it really gives you the protection that you need closing into the election day.
So would you also say, again, I think everybody's going to be looking over the postmortem of what could have been better, what could have been done more smartly. Do you credit the Republicans getting out there face to face despite a pandemic and the Democrats kind of holding back and not doing all the door knocking that is so important?
I can tell you that after talking to all of our candidates, like I said, there were almost every one of our candidates was out door knocking on a regular basis. And the feedback, and I was trying to get the feedback from our staff as well as our candidates, what are you getting from Iowans? And it was maybe 1 out of 100 people that were concerned when someone would come to their door. And remember, we're not going up to their door. In most cases, I would say the person was wearing a mask. And for sure, if they weren't, they obviously were knocking, backing off the step. It's not like we were asking to go into the house. In a lot of cases, you'd knock and somebody, if they were uncomfortable, which again was happening very rarely, you may just say, okay, I'll leave you a piece of literature here. Love to have your vote. It doesn't have to be that personal handshake at the door that maybe historically we've done. But I think seeing your legislator out there or your candidate out there working really gives you, like I said, gives you that protection of all those negative ads and attacks that come down the home stretch.
Okay, so let's talk about moving forward. Everybody wants to know, with those new seats that you have, and as you said, an even better majority, right? How does that look for the next legislative session?
Well, obviously we're just the next morning on, and I haven't even had the chance to talk to every one of the new members. I've called almost all of them, but I wasn't able to reach them all last night. So we're going to be having caucus next week. The way that we do it as far as our caucus, and this is regardless if I was speaker or going back to Speaker Upmeyer or Speaker Paulson, is we'll get together with our caucus shortly after the election again next week. start talking about what the priorities of the caucus would be. That's one thing that we pride ourselves on as House Republicans, is we really, I'll give you a perfect example. Childcare issues that we've been really focused on the last couple of years came from our preliminary caucuses before session, to start to craft what our issues were going to be as a caucus. So that process will start next week. The one thing that I can tell you that I feel very confident about is continue to be fiscally responsible. That's something that House Republicans, having the majority for the last 10 years, have always tried to lead on a responsible budget. Recently, we were voted #1 in the country to be prepared for the pandemic when it comes to the state's budget. And so we take pride in that. So I can tell you that will be an issue that I don't have to necessarily go to the caucus, because I already have a pretty good indication where they're going to want to go, which is investing in our priorities, but making sure that we're in a position where if we don't see something coming like what we experienced this spring, that we're prepared to handle it.
From talking to your new members, and I know you haven't talked to everybody, but keeping an eye on those races that did flip and go your way, what do you think was the #1 issue on the ballot for those voters?
I think depends what part of the state. I can tell you in Ankeny, Gobble, and Southern Ankeny, I think about 200 votes margin. And I can tell you that one of the #1 issues, I was at an event in the last month in Ankeny with our candidates, and I can tell you the issue of school reopening was a huge issue. So that was a very localized issue. So that isn't going to be all of them across the state. I think that the way the state has been led, so I can't necessarily point to a specific issue like this bill or this issue, but I think it's the leadership that we've been able to display working with the Senate and the governor. I think that message of that continued path that we're on is what I was hearing more of, and I think our candidates were hearing more of. The path that Iowa is on is the right trajectory. But then you do have some districts where you have those hypersensitive issues, like I said, in the Ankeny seat, in John Landon's reelection, played a huge role in being very vocal, and Garrett Gobble, elect Gobble, being vocal about that issue. So it just depends, but I think overall it's the direction of the state and the proven leadership that House Republicans have displayed over the last 10 years.
Final question, what do you say to the voters who didn't vote for the Republicans in the House, and they're maybe waking up this morning feeling a little bit anxious, that, just agenda after agenda item that they don't agree with would be rammed through the legislative process? What can you tell them?
Well, I think back to what I said originally. Our caucus comes from all across the state. I think that's a huge difference that we have with the Democrats, where I would say their power has been consolidated about a dozen counties. We represent from all across the state. And that's one thing, as far as being speaker, my job is a little bit more difficult having so many members, instead of being, the Senate's 50 members, we're 100. So if you're in the majority, you're at least at 51 members. And so that's been one thing about our caucus is the decisions that we make come from all of our members. We get together, we talk about them. Very rarely, if ever, does the leadership, for example, get together with the Senate and the governor, go to the caucus and say, you're going to do this. It's taking that input from 97 of the 99 counties that we represent, which we'd love to have all 99, and that's our goal to get to that point. But take that input from all across the state and then try to have that as our agenda. And, I think that we've been able to display over the last several years that we've been able to, again, look at the budget's a perfect example. We've passed a budget where we've still invested hundreds of millions of dollars in K-12 education. We've added money for rural school districts for transportation costs, property tax and equity. Some of those issues that we've done things for, we don't represent those school districts. The property tax and equity, we don't represent all those school districts that impacts, but we recognize as Iowans that it's an issue. So I think having a big caucus that comes from all across the state really gives us, and that would be my message, it really gives us that kind of what's best for the entire state of Iowa for our caucus.
Anything else you want to add, Speaker?
No, I would just say the one thing that I'm going to talk about, anybody that asked today as far as kind of looking back at the election, is I think that there's been a strong message sent, whether it was the Senate race or the legislative races here in the House. There was millions, and in the Senate race, hundreds of millions of dollars and millions of dollars spent from out-of-state groups or out-of-state donors into the race. And hopefully that the message has been sent to across the country that Iowans, their votes can't just be bought. It's something you got to put in that hard work. You got to be at the doors. You got to travel the state. I hope that message is something that's sent loud and clear. And I think regardless of party, we can all be proud of that. that you can't just come in and buy Iowans' vote. You have to work for it.